Hello, in this video we're going to set up a bare bones foundation for building almost any other JavaScript project from. This project will have an Express.js development server with NodeMon and browser sync, and we're going to set up a basic package.json file with scripts and configurations for running the dev server, and we're going to have a simple file and folder structure with a minimal index.html, app.js, and style CSS. The first thing we want to do is create our project directory, and we'll call that JavaScript project starter, and then we'll cd into that, and then we're going to create our client and server directories, and we'll put a app subdirectory under our client folder, and then we'll create index.html, style CSS, and app.js in our client folder, and we'll put a file named dev server in our server folder, and we'll add a gitignore to the project. And to verify that your files and folders were created correctly, you can run the tree command, or we can just open Sublime Text and verify it there. Next, we're going to create our package.json file by running npm init, and I'm going to add a -y flag to that so that my package.json will be created using all default values. If you look in package.json, you can see that some of my default values might not be the standard. You can set these however you like by creating an npm-rc file. And if you'd like to find out more about npm-rc files, you can go to the npm docs and go to the npm-rc section. It'll tell you all about what you would need to do to create an npm-rc and where you can store it. You can store it at different levels, and it'll take effect at different levels globally or locally, whatever the case may be. And you can see my npm-rc file, which is in my home directory, has my author name, author URL, license, and version all set so that when I use the -y flag, those are the values that get used as the default values. Okay, so I'm going to clean up my package.json a little bit and just take out the main section because I'm not publishing this, so there's nothing to deploy or depend on as a dependency. I don't have any keywords. I'm going to move the author and license up under the description, and I'm also going to set a value for private. So if you mark your package.json as private, that means it will not be published to npm. So we'll set that to true. Then we want to create a config section, so we can add configs to our package.json that our project can then read later on in our Node.js scripts. And we're going to give this a browser sync port, and we'll set that to 10,080. And then we're going to create an express port, and we'll set that to 20,080. And then in our scripts, we're going to take out the test script for now, and we'll add a post install script, and this script will be run right after you run npm install. And we're going to run a function called npm outdated, and what this function will do is it'll read all of your dependencies in your package.json, and it'll tell you if you have any that are old versions or not the recommended version, and it'll show you what version you have versus what version it recommends you have. So that's kind of nice if you are interested in keeping your dependencies up to date. Then we'll add a serve build. So this is a custom script. There are some scripts that npm recognizes by default. Post install is one of those, and you can just type npm post install, for example, and it'll run that script. But if you add a custom script name, say serve :build, npm doesn't recognize that by default, so you'd have to type npm run serve :build to run this script. And this one, we're gonna just set up a environment variable named serve directory, and set it to dist. So when we run our dev server, it's going to check for this environment variable, and if it's set, it's going to serve that directory instead of the default directory that we'll set in our server. And then we're just going to run npm start, which is our next script, which is going to just start our dev server. So we create our start script, and we'll use nodemon to start our server, and we're going to tell it to watch the server directory. So if anything changes in that directory, it'll automatically restart the server, and then it's going to just start our server dev server script. Alright, so now we have our basic package.json set up. This will change a little bit as we install other dependencies later, but for now this is all we need to really run our dev server with. And if you're interested in learning more about setting up your package.json, you can go to the npm docs, and they have a section for scripts, which will tell you the script names that npm will recognize by default, and if they have any special functionality like install and post install or run after a package is installed. Also, you can go to the package.json section, and it'll list out all the possible fields that you can set in your package.json and kind of how to set that up. And then there's also a CLI command section. So if you had like what was it, we used outdated, so the outdated function, you can go there and it'll tell you what all these different functions do when you run them from npm. So there's the npm install, and it'll tell you all the different kind of arguments that you can use for each command, and it's really helpful. And now we can install Express nodemon and browser sync. So I'll type npm I-D and Express nodemon and browser sync. And the npm I-D is just short for install save dev. And actually, if you're interested, there's a section in the npm docs that tells you all of the shorthands that you can use, all the shortcuts you can use for the different npm flags. Alright. And now that those are installed, we can start actually writing some code. So we'll go to our dev server, and we're just going to import a few of our dependencies. So we'll get browser sync, express, path. That's pretty standard. And then we're going to make use of those things we set up in the package.json. So first we'll look for our serve directory, and we'll call that directory to serve. And that's going to be on process.env.serve directory. So if that's set, we will use whatever the value is set to, or else we're just going to serve our client directory by default. Next, we're going to look for our express port. So we'll do const, we'll just call it port since it's the main server port. And that's going to be on process.env.npm_package_config_express port. So you can see that whatever you put in your package.json, the config variable name or field name is just express port. When you reference it in your script, it's going to be on process env, and it's going to be prefixed with npm package config. So if you put npm underscore package underscore config underscore, and then just put whatever your variable name from the config section was. You'll find your value that you set. And then we're going to do the same thing for the browser sync. So we'll call this, this will be our proxy port, because browser sync is actually just going to set up a proxy server. I think that's right. No. All right. Oh, and last but not least, we need to actually create our server. So our server is just going to be Express. Some people name that app. I just name it server because it makes more sense to me. Then we're going to set up a function that's going to act as a listener in our server. So this function is actually going to run browser sync. And yeah, we'll talk about that later. We'll talk about how this acts as a second server. Browser sync is a function, and you pass it a configuration object, and it takes a proxy. What are we proxying? We're going to proxy localhost at our port, our express port. We can give it some files to watch. So it takes an array, and you can pass it globs. So we'll use the new JavaScript string literal syntax, and we will tell it to look in our directory to serve. And we want to look at all files that end in .css, .html, and .js in that directory. And we want to do that for all subdirectories of that directory. And finally, we want to tell it what port to serve itself on, and that will be the proxy port. Now we can create our server. Say server.use, and we'll tell it what we're going to say express. Tell it what directory to serve. We'll say path.join. We use path.join in order to create a proper directory so that the server will understand where it's coming from. It's basically an easy way to create an absolute path to your directory. And you just tell it to join anything that's in your path. Then we'll say server.listen, and here we'll pass in the port, so that will create an instance of just the regular Express server serving on the Express port, and then we'll pass in the sync function, which is going to act as an additional listener. So that basically adds a second server to the server. It'll run the sync function and create the browser sync server. And then when you run this, when you start your server, the browser sync server will actually automatically open a browser window for you. So when you start your server, your browser window will open up to the proxy port because it's the browser sync server that opens the window up. You can also open your window up to the regular Express port, and it'll be serving there. It just won't live reload. The browser sync server running on the proxy port is the only thing that will live reload. And then finally, we'll put a console.log just to give a friendly message to say that our server is running. Okay, so that is our dev server, and we have it set up to use our variables that we set in our package.json. Now we can go ahead and create something to serve. So we'll start with our index.html. So our index HTML is just a standard HTML boilerplate. We have our title, we're importing our style CSS file, we have a h1 tag, and we're importing our app.js file. So nothing too exciting going on there. Then we'll add simple styles to our style CSS, give a background color and a font color just to have something to show. And then in our app.js, we're going to just create a div and add it to the body and give it a message that says it works. And as an aside, if you notice, I'm not using any semicolons in my JavaScript, and that's because I recently found out about a linter called standard.js, and it's ESLint under the hood, but it sets a configuration once and for all for you, so you don't have to set your own configuration, and you either agree with it or not, and I tend to agree with it. One of the things that I've learned that really made me like this linter was the proper way to use semicolons in JavaScript, since there's only about 5 places where not having a semicolon actually affects you, and if you write good code, there's only 1 or 2 that rarely affect you. Just knowing how to properly use semicolons in JavaScript really kind of opened my eyes, so I really like this linter. Anyways, so now we can run our dev server and see if everything works. Let's type npm start, and it starts up just fine. Check our console, everything looks good there, no errors. Alright, so that was a success, and last but not least, we can spec out our gitignore file. And basically we're just gonna ignore our coverage directory, which is something that will store our unit test coverage reports, and we'll cover that in a future video, but it's good to have it there so we don't forget later. We'll ignore our dist folder, which is where our built JavaScript code will go, and we'll ignore our node modules, which is where our dependencies live. And with that taken care of, that is our JavaScript foundation. So we can use this to build any other JavaScript application on top of from now on. Feel free to comment if you have any questions or suggestions. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. And if you'd like to see more of my videos, please subscribe to my channel. And as always, thank you for watching.